My name is Georgina O'Farrill, and I'm the head of Outreach and Partnerships at the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. The CEC, as we call it in English, CCA en español, and CCE en français, was created by the governments of Canada, Mexico, and the US, the United States, to facilitate environmental cooperation on issues of common concern on our environmental North American region. North America for the CEC is Canada, Mexico, and the US, and that's why we speak the three languages, to try to get and reach everyone in North America. We are this year celebrating our 30th anniversary, and for us, all this year has been a celebration of collaboration and cooperation between our three countries. This panel embodies CEC's mission to bring together actors from different sectors, from different voices, and to try to protect, conserve, and restore our environment, our shared North American environment, but certainly to learn from others across the globe and just to share kind of their knowledge with us. With this panel, we hope we can demonstrate to you that collaboration and cooperation are key for the protection of biodiversity, for the conservation of our ecosystems, and for the health of our planet. As we keep hearing all this week, and we will be hearing throughout the week at this COP16 here in Cali, Colombia, we need to reintegrate biodiversity back into our lives so that we can build a sustainable relationship with nature. We need to keep working on the relationship between biodiversity and our health, and on every linkage with our communities. Biodiversity makes us resilient, and we need to continue and to ensure that the benefits of biodiversity are distributed equally. With this panel, with all the voices that we have here, we want to reflect where are we heading, how we want or how we should be working together, what is missing, who is missing at the table, and most important, we want to build connections that makes us better, and to ensure that conservation and biodiversity is treated in an inclusive way so we can make peace with nature. Our panelists today will discuss among themselves and with you on the challenges and the opportunities to create inclusive spaces. From local, from regional, from international, you will hear from them on what has been working for them, what is not working, and where do they see that the North American region could be a good example to showcase to the world how cooperation could be done. After the discussion with our panelists, we will open this conversation with you. We're trying not to call it a panel. We were just discussing outside. This is an open dialogue. This is a conversation. We want this to be an honest discussion on where are we heading. We will open it for questions and answers at the end of the panel. For those of you that don't feel like coming to the microphone or kind of asking your question on the microphone, we want to make it inclusive. Just raise your hand. We'll give you a piece of paper, and you can write your question in paper in any of your language. I'm happy here to introduce our panelists. Secretary of Environment, Climate Change, and Emergency Management on the OTP Miss Hiwak Métis government. I almost got it right. Tempulian Gonzalez, welcome. National Assembly of First Nations Knowledge Keeper and BC Assembly of First Nations 2S LGBTQIA plus Knowledge Keeper, welcome. Sanda Anjara Ratkutumalala, practice this for quite some time now, Associate Researcher at the University of Antananarivo. And also she's here representing the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Dr. Alexandra Harrington, which I believe she's online, and she will be online. She's a lecturer at the Lancaster University Law School and a chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law Agreement on Plastic Pollution Task Force. Antoine Asselin Guyen is our project lead at the Ecosystems Unit at the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. And we're so proud to have Antoine here to be part of this panel. Justin Gulino, Conservation Associate at the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. Welcome, Justin. I'm very happy to have here Ana Cristina Posadas, co-founder of ORMA, and also the representative of the selected team representing Mexico for CEC's Generation of Environmental Leaders program. Bienvenida, Ana Cristina. We also have here Basil Van Horn. Thank you for joining us today. It's going to be very important to kind of push this intergenerational discussion, to really try to be honest, I ask all of you to challenge yourself, to challenge everyone, just to be kind of really inclusive and to see where we're heading with the biological conservation. So I'm going to start this panel, and I think a little bit with all the panelists. Jump in, raise your hand, open your microphone, make sure you speak loud and clear. And just, Ana Cristina, she's going to be speaking Spanish, and you're all welcome to switch between English and Spanish. Antoine, if you want to speak French and Spanish, also please welcome. So I think the first question that we want to ask, and it's a very simple one. What does inclusivity mean to you in biological conservation? It's a simple one that maybe everybody should be able to answer. And if not, I'm going to pick someone. Basil, please.
It's a range of situation. It starts from shaking the hand of your neighbor and looking at him. It goes all the way to having a joint program of work and launching into multi-year collaboration. What we should be looking at in the context of the implementation of the GBF is we always said that the solution was to have a whole of society inclusion in the GBF. And when you look at the targets, you have targets for government, you have targets for business, and you have targets for individual people like me and you. So let's start with that concept of inclusivity being involving everybody in the solution.
Thank you, Basil. Someone else? What does inclusivity mean? Secretary Jason, please.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for having me here to be on this panel. I think when we're talking about inclusivity, especially from the perspective of Indigenous peoples, it's important to remember that inclusivity needs to start at the very beginning. It's important that you keep Indigenous peoples at the forefront of these conversations and this policy making and decision making, because in the end of the day, it's Indigenous peoples that are the ones that are most adversely affected by the lack of biodiversity. So it's important that we keep us at the forefront and involve us throughout the whole process, not just later on when you decide to do your consultation halfway through.
Thank you, Secretary Jason. Please, Julian.
Thank you. First of all, I want to offer our sincere gratitude to the Indigenous peoples of this territory. Honored to see each and every one of you, respected delegates, elders, matriarchs, kupis, and chiefs that are in the room. My ancestral name is Simplion. I come from a village known today as Mission Indian Reserve in North Vancouver. Like my previous colleagues and previous speakers were mentioning, Indigenous rights and Indigenous knowledge goes back thousands and thousands of years. And being Squamish, I come from a matrilineal environment, meaning I follow my mother's, my grandmother's, my great-grandmother's ancestry. My ancestry is Musqueam Squamish, Squamish Tsimshian, Musqueam Cowichan, Squamish Mauli. My great-grandfather came from a village known today as Mauli. He was a Mapuche Indian, and he married my great-grandmother, who is a Shwomton. She was an Indian doctor or medicine woman for the Squamish people. Traditional knowledge on biodiversity is passed down through the generations, through our teachings, through our snuwaish. Those teachings, what I do in my community is I'm able to pass that knowledge down to my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and our smanham. That's a Squamish term, means for our future unborn. If we can't protect Mother Earth today, how are we going to protect Mother Earth for tomorrow? Hat kwestimas.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think you touch on the importance of communities. We need to engage with communities from the beginning. We cannot engage with them once everything is set up. So maybe I'll just pose a question, and maybe Christina, your work kind of with different communities, you can tell us, how do we engage with communities in Mexico? How do you do it?
Bueno, hola a todos.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak in Spanish. So, to give you an example of the project we have in our generation of environmental leaders at CCA representing Mexico, throughout all this time that we've been working with indigenous communities, something that has worked quite well is working not for the communities, but with the communities. The projects that we've carried out include the tools for the communities, but we also respect their knowledge. We don't impose any techniques or anything. We have actually taught them some biological monitoring techniques. We were discussing wildlife monitoring. We taught them to take samples of animals to assess their health. We are working in a comprehensive project where we have community leaders, and they are the ones who tell us what to do, and we don't tell them. So at each meeting, they promote the actions that are tackling their main environmental needs. In this specific case, I can tell you a bit about the project we are working on. It's the restoration of a wetland. It's a site we have with these characteristics in Mexico. In March last year, it was burnt because of a problem with the crops, and 80% of the wetland was lost. So the actions we took with the communities were promoted by themselves. They proposed the restoration. They suggested producing native plants, and they proposed to reforest those native plants. They suggested new forms to diversify their economy because they don't have a lot of means to obtain or get an income in that community. So we are working on specific actions to integrate the community, give them that recognition and acknowledgement that they've participated. This is something they also look for, and for them to have an economic and social benefit, always respecting their ancestral knowledge. Those are the three main topics we've been working on. Thank you. Thank you, Ana Cristina.
Change of language. Would like to also share kind of how do you kind of engage communities? Or what are the important elements that we should all keep in mind when we engage with different communities working on the conservation of biodiversity? Justin, please.
Hi. Thank you again, Georgina, for having us in NCL today. I would like to share that sometimes the partner that you think is like an unexpected group that could come for like doing this engagement. So we have a story for a legislator that was in the Midwest near like Wisconsin, and there was an issue of aquatic invasive species there. And previously we didn't know about this issue, that it was largely due to a disconnect between policy and implementation. And what happened is that the way the original bill was written was that it did not give law enforcement the ability to go in and engage with communities that needed to like do the work on the ground, because this law enforcement was making sure that these invasive species didn't get into the freshwater body originally. So we were able to bring, through a webinar, law enforcement with the legislators together and they're currently working together to like refine that bill and get a better version out there. And then when we think about that, this is law enforcement that's relatively powerful. We should think that like these marginalized groups and underrepresented groups need to be made intentionally outreach to, because this was something that could have been fixed through a liaison of the law enforcement authority with the legislators. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think kind of we've heard here kind of two, successful kind of stories about kind of how you engage communities. Antoine, I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add to this.
Merci, Georgina. Bonjour.
Thank you, Georgina. Good morning to all of you. Hola, in Spanish as well. Je m'appelle Altana, je travaille auprès de la Commission pour la coopération pour l'environnement. C'est une initiative internationale ou intergouvernementale. Et lorsqu'on parle inclusivité,
work on many different topics. The topics I work on include the central grasslands conservation, migratory birds, pollinators, the modern butterfly. For migratory species that we share between our three countries, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, there's a lot of people to include when we discuss conservations of these species, migratory species. So just going back to echo what my colleagues have said, I think I also believe including everyone at the table is one step, but intentional engagement from the beginning is also very important. When we develop our projects, we've heard this, it's a priority now more and more for our three governments to support underrepresented groups, to support intentional engagement of these underrepresented groups to the conversation. So it's not just government taking those decisions, but we also include the voices of indigenous communities, the private sector, academia, other NGOs that sometimes are not included. So what we do, as you've mentioned, intentional engagement from the beginning. We write this in our project descriptions as we develop our work. So that means that we set budget and time aside to do that specifically, and that might mean, for example, selecting people to invite to certain events so that they have their voice at the table, that they can be heard, that they can voice their thoughts. And I can give you examples. For example, we've had work on grasslands, and there was the Grassland Summit 2 years ago in Colorado. And we've worked to offer travel support, financial aid, to have many more local landowners, farmers, and also indigenous communities, indigenous people to attend this event. And they could attend this event, be heard, voice what they had to say about grassland conservation, and also organize themselves. I've seen that since that event happened 2 years ago. Indigenous people that we supported formed themselves together with other indigenous people. They met there and formed, they call this the Indigenous Kinship Circle. And that has been a very beautiful initiative to see happen. This is something that after they formed themselves, we saw opportunities to support them again. We were able to identify people, indigenous people from Canada and the United States, to be part of the conversation. But we didn't know much about indigenous people in the grasslands of northern Chihuahua in Mexico. So we've supported these communities in Canada and the States to go do field visits to these communities in northern Chihuahua, so we could learn more what they think, what they need, what support they need, and if they can be part of the conversation on grassland conservation. And just finally, we also have grant programs like I forgot the acronym now, Georgina, NAPICA and EJ for Climate. We were able, through grants, to also support these communities to do more work on topics that were relevant to them. So I think including people at the table and from the beginning, intentionally engage them is the way to go.
Thank you. And I think kind of, hopefully today with this kind of amazing panel, you can see that we did our best to kind of have a diverse set of voices. Please, Sempuyan.
Just simply on here, just reflecting on, and just in Canada, there are 604 tribes in Canada. In British Columbia, there's 204 tribes. So our biodiversity coast to coast really is different, but those policies, the big challenge for if we're going to be talking about invasive species, the big challenge is we do have provincial policies that are in place. Those provincial policies are governed by the federal policies. By the time we get through the bureaucratical red tape to attack plants that are invasive to our territory, those invasive species will take over. And so that's the big challenge. So we're going to switch to marine life. We have salmon fish farms that are in our waters. Those salmon fish farms are detrimental to our wild salmon stock. So, we want to preserve our salmon species. We need to get rid of salmon farms. That's my personal opinion. I do know Assembly First Nations has a stand on doing our best to dismantle salmon farms on the Pacific coast. If we're thinking about all kinds of things, I really want to thank you. I'll stop talking now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is an open dialogue where we wanted to hear your voices and to share it with everyone. Please, Secretary Jason.
Yeah, I'd like to expand upon that as well, about the bureaucratic red tape and these very convoluted processes that we often have to go through. And I think when we're talking about inclusion, an important part of inclusion with Indigenous people is entrusting that we do have the traditional knowledge or traditional sciences and the capability to care for this land and to allow us to have that self-determination to care for the land as we see fit without having to get a million different rubber stamps and to go through 100 different pieces of red tape.
Thank you. That's certainly a very important point to take. I think as we're kind of moving along, one thing that we wanted to ask you, and probably we'll try to engage with Alexandra Harrington, Dr. Alexandra Harrington, that is online. So hopefully her audio will work. What are the main barriers that we're all facing, or that kind of everybody faces when we're trying to have an inclusive biodiversity approach? I don't know if Dr. Harrington, if you can hear us.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Georgina? Or not?
While she comes online, please, Basil.
Barriers for inclusiveness. I think we got to work harder at getting the various organizations working together. I've seen experience where you go into a community with a good project and the project is supported by all, but what is missing is basic infrastructure, housing, clean water, and we got to work across departments, across responsibility to enable that, because if you don't have those basic conditions of living, you're not going to have conservation. So it's a challenge. It's not easy. It can be done, but it requires a lot of people, looking at things with different eyes.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wants to. What are the main barriers? Where are we failing? Where can we do better? Justin.
In the United States, we're largely operating on an outdated model of wildlife conservation. So in the States, they mostly fund their conservation work through hunting and trapping fees and fishing fees as well. And historically, that is what used to make up the majority of fees and outdoor engagement. But now we've seen it shift to where we're now having people who are not really trapping and hunting as much, but are rather recreating outside in terms of hiking and photos and other forms of outdoor recreation. But we're still stuck on that same mindset that we have to manage for hunters and trappers. And our boards and commissions are still heavily represented of these trappers and fishers, and we don't really have a seat for these other outdoor engagement enthusiasts. So the hikers or the scientists as well still aren't on those commissions. And state legislators actually do have the power to modify how those commissions are structured, but it's still a very fraught contentious topic in the United States and something that doesn't usually get priority in hearings. And that's a big barrier for having everyone involved in it.
Thank you. Dr. Harrington, I don't know if you want to engage. What are the main barriers?
I'm hoping you can hear me. Can you hear me, Georgina?
We're going to try again.
Okay. Any luck?
Yes.
Excellent. Fantastic. Okay, good. So first of all, thank you all. I will try the camera again just to see if it works, but hopefully, there we go. So thank you all for the chance to be here and to join you all remotely. I think from the international perspective and from the perspective of negotiations in particular. So, for example, the plastics treaty negotiation, which I'm currently working on now, and also the science policy panel, which will address plastic and also other types of pollution. We see gaps, we see barriers in being able to meaningfully include Indigenous voices and community voices. So we see a lot of concerns right now at the moment with ideas of how do we ensure transparency in negotiation processes, which is important for those of us who work in negotiations, but it's also important when we think for how we might then in the future have international law to be implemented across different jurisdictions at the national level and also internationally. So what we're seeing a lot of challenges with at the moment is the idea of trying to keep open a place for stakeholders, balancing against a more traditional international law view of negotiations, especially being for states, and trying to bridge those two views so that we can have not only viewpoints represented and Indigenous communities, for example, giving comments during open sessions that we have of negotiations, but also being able to have those views included in treaty text and being included in the drafting and the implementation process as well. So it's an ongoing process, and I think it's something where having these types of discussions like we're having now in the context of CBD is so important because of the knowledge that Indigenous communities in particular and traditional and local communities can bring to how we implement international law in biodiversity, but also beyond. So in pollution, in public health, in climate, etc. These are really key insights to have. And it's a question of how we make sure that those voices continue to be heard throughout the process. So thank you all. And then thank you for continuing with the microphone. I will turn off the camera because I think that may have just made it a little choppy, but thank you.
Thank you. That sounds very rhythmical. Maybe go ahead, Secretary Jason, please.
Yes, thank you for those comments. And I think it's important in the framing of this as well to remember that it's not just about including Indigenous people in this work, it's about empowering Indigenous people to do this work. You know, our ancestors have taken care of the land since time immemorial, and we are inversely affected by a lack of biodiversity. You know, a lack of biodiversity equals an increase in hardships for our Indigenous peoples, especially those that are still living on the land. You know, it affects our food security and our access to traditional plant medicines. And a big problem we've been having in recent years in BC and Alberta is the wildfires. And the problem with the wildfires is affected by the lack of biodiversity within our forest systems now. It removes, you know, a lot of resilience within our ecosystems, and also the fact that Indigenous people haven't been allowed to practice their traditional fire-keeping methods and the ways that they took care of the forests for generations and generations. It's created a lot of these compound problems where you have a buildup of a huge amount of biomass within our ecosystems. So when a fire does start, it very quickly burns out of control. And, you know, and there's very simple solutions to these problems that Indigenous people figured out thousands and thousands of years ago. So, you know, it's very important to include Indigenous people in this work, but empowering us to do the work that our ancestors have done for generations is, I'd say, the bigger component of that.
Thank you very much, Secretary Jason. And I think you mentioned something important, the generations. the intergenerational, the knowledge sharing. I think that's something that is part of the CEC mission. We work to conserve our environment for this generation and for the generations to come. And I think it was very important for us at the CEC to have the voices of all the different generations, because it's important that we don't forget that each one of us, we have some knowledge, we have expertise, we all can learn from each other. And only by working together and listening to each other, we will be able to truly, truly kind of be in nature. And with that, I would like to ask kind of Sanda, who's here, from the Global Biodiversity Youth Network, how do we integrate youth? How do we put youth at the table? How, in your vision, from your experience, how can we do better?
Okay, thank you so much for this very interesting question. So our motto is like nothing about youth without youth. So when we're talking about inclusivity, it's about not leaving anyone behind. It's about thinking about everyone's interests and perspective when you do policy, when you do actions, when you design funds, or when you design a project. Then you have to think about all of the other people who are going to be involved, who are going also to suffer or benefit from the results of your actions. So how do we involve youth? I think there is two levels of involving youth. First of all, it's at the policy level, and the second is at the action level. And I also wanted to remind that the term youth is also an umbrella for a very diverse community. There are indigenous people youth, young researchers, also young people, say, for example, entrepreneurs, that is in this big umbrella of being youth. And what I would say is, like, first of all, giving us a meaningful participation, which means very different things to many different people, not just being present at the table, but we have to be given an opportunity to voice our opinions and also to reflect our perspectives in all of the policies, also in all of the actions that we want to do, and also in terms of access to information and fundings. That is quite a bit, how to say it, complicated from the youth perspective, because, for example, as we have our national chapters. We have at the moment 44 national chapters all around the world or plus. And we are building this small organization in the beginning, and we want to do some projects, let's say, for example, and we are looking for fundings. Usually funders will ask, where is your bank account? Where is all of your procedures, financial procedures? Have you already managed at least half of the amount that you are asking for? So it also means not facilitating, but like accommodating for all of the various aspects of youth capacity as well when you design things. And some of the examples that I would share here is like, it was a big victory, and it was also in collaboration with local communities and indigenous people caucuses, women's caucuses, when we got the target 22 inside the KMGBF. It's been a long process because we ran consultation from more than 110 countries all around the world. Since 2019, about the zero draft and then the KMGBF, we had multiple partners that recognized the utility and the importance of having youth voices in these policy discussions. And we got the target. And now all of our chapters, they are able to use that target 22 when talking to our, let's say, decision makers or also other partners. Like, we have this target. We are empowered by this target. You are also liable to that target to work with us. But also many of our chapters, I think it's about 40 chapters, participated meaningfully, let's say, in the update of our respective national biodiversity strategy and action plan. And something that I wanted to raise when you talked about giving examples of actions about that you have led. At the moment, there is a lot of actions that youth are making, but like it's not accounted for in national reports. So there is also this lack of inclusivity in terms of data disaggregation and data collection when it comes to recognizing the work that youth is doing at every level.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're very happy for you to be here. Does anyone want to talk about kind of how do we engage youth? How can we engage them and have them at the table?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to the youth aspect as well. And, I believe in Canada, the definition of youth goes up to the age of 29. So I technically also fall under the definition of a youth. And, something that we face as youth, and I experienced a lot coming up working in our provincial youth councils and with doing youth outreach work, is we're constantly told youth are the future, youth are the leaders of tomorrow. But I think it's important to realize that youth are actually right now. Youth are the leaders of today. We have youth sitting at this table with us. I'm a youth, and I'm a leader within my community. And so youth are the ones that are today. And the youth voices are the ones that have to be held with a very high regard when it comes to decision making and policy making, because youth are the ones that have to deal with the long-term consequences of these decisions being made today. So they should be the ones that have the loudest voice in that decision making.
I just wanted to jump on that. I was a bit afraid to have such discourse because at the moment, people, especially from an African perspective, when you have that kind of discourse, people think that you are irrespective of them, or like you want to take their place, or you are just like being controversial. But I think that's a very important point. And also recognizing that, youth is going to suffer or benefit from actual decisions. That's already a big step, and it can really lead to inclusivity.
Thank you. Basil, please.
I'm going to flip that question around. And if we're talking about intergenerational equity, what do my co-panelists think about including older people like me?
Listen, Vivian.
Director's probably younger than me. Just saying. First of all, I want to thank the youth that are sitting on this panel. I'm really grateful. I have grandchildren older than you, so the most important thing is, for myself, and a lot of Indigenous families and tribes in Canada have really moved towards land-based teachings, where we're bringing our youth out on the land, teaching them how to hunt, how to fish, how to can our salmon, how to wind dry our salmon, how to prepare our moose, our elk, our deer. And I remember as a young boy going hunting with my grandfather. And so, that's the integral part of how we can include our youth. I've had the opportunity to have my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren in the same canoe with me. And that's the biggest medicine for me. And how can we engage the elders in each respective communities? We need to get them out on the land, invite them. Just to let you know, I like coffee. I don't drink tea. And because Squamish teachings, if you want an elder to pass down those traditional teachings, you give them food. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And on a personal note, I work with youth, I collaborate with youth, and that's kind of, the most amazing kind of, encouraging kind of for me. It just kind of, it's to be humble also as an older generation, knowing that the generations that are coming have a lot to share with us, and we have a lot of things to learn from the elders and from the youth. I'm gonna, as we're talking about kind of Please go ahead, Secretary Jason. For sure, this is
Yeah,
just an open
I want to
dialogue.
comment on that as well, because I think, as most people in the room are probably aware, within Indigenous communities, our elders are a vital a part of that. Those are the ones that hold our traditional knowledge and our traditional teachings and help pass down our oral culture. And I know for myself and everyone in my community, it's having those strong elders to guide us and teach us throughout our youth that has created a very strong generation of very motivated and very powerful and intelligent and educated leaders within people my age and younger. And so I think for Indigenous people, there is that inherent need to include our elders and our knowledge keepers. And I think when you look at traditional practices, you kind of see that within every step of the way, right? Everything you do, you have the guidance of the elders. And within a lot of our Indigenous governance systems too, a lot of our councils made up of elected people and elected positions will also have a role there for the elders, not necessarily to be a vote at the table, but to be a voice of reason and understanding and to help with conflict resolution and just to help guide decision making in a way that benefits, all generations, as well as the 7 generations principles, 7 generations before and after. I think the intergenerational aspect of it is a really important component for us as Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. And I think we're talking about kind of, including everyone. But I think an important aspect we also wanted to discuss today was the equitable access for biodiversity. And, something that we keep talking is environmental justice and that kind of having everyone, having the benefits. I think I would like to hear from you, what does the term environmental justice means to you in your work? How does that reflect a little bit on your actions? How does environmental justice is linked to biodiversity conservation? Please, Diane.
There was a gold mine in British Columbia that was fined, I think, $80,000 for dumping shillings into the river. $80,000. So there's no real consequence from a environmental stand. If we're having mines that are dumping raw whatever materials into our rivers that will decimate our salmon stock, again, there are no monetary consequences to those fines because 80,000 will not replace a generation of salmon stock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I want to highlight an example of something that kind of would trend towards environmental justice for us as well. And it's something that's really exciting that we've been spending a lot of time working really hard towards in my community in southern Alberta. And it's actually going to just be taking place next week. In Banff National Park, they've opened it up for the first time in over 130 years for Indigenous harvesters to come in and harvest from the land. So next week, we have a group of Métis harvesters that'll be going out to harvest a buffalo in a traditional way. And it's things like this that are small steps towards allowing and empowering Indigenous peoples to care for the land in the way that they always have. In some of the materials we were sent just before this panel, it talked about how to ensure both biological conservation and cultural preservation. And in my mind, those are the same thing. I think if you can properly ensure the protection of one, you're properly ensuring the protection of the other.
Thank you. And I want to see if Dr. Harrington, you can still hear us.
Hoping you can hear me. I won't turn the camera on because it caused chaos when I did it before. But I think just another perspective on environmental justice.
We want to hear.
Can you? Yes? Yes? Okay, I see a head nodding. So I think another perspective on environmental justice to think about is obviously how critical it is to think about it in Indigenous communities, but also when we're thinking about biological diversity and we're thinking about a number of different international laws that we're creating or we have created to address biodiversity, to make sure that it is mainstreamed throughout climate, throughout all the pollution treaties, etc., because it's part of the triple planetary crisis. We also remember that environmental justice and biodiversity are linked in topics like financing and providing financial assistance and financial mechanisms to implement treaty obligations and to allow countries to implement them, and also provide resources to other communities to allow them to then have a benefit from whatever might be in the international law instrument that we're talking about. And also that when we think about international law and environmental justice, we can think about it in terms of things like reporting requirements, state commitments that we then can monitor and oversee and have compliance mechanisms for. So there are a number of different ways that hopefully, especially current and also future generations and those in this room in particular, can think about how we take existing environmental laws at the international level in particular, and then can use them as a tool for environmental justice in ways that perhaps when they were initially created we might not have thought of. But now we have that ability to, and hopefully this is something that we will be able to continue to grow, and we will continue to see a further development as all of you, especially those of you who are youth in the room, will be able to have a different perspective on and be able to guide, for example, what we think financing for biodiversity should look like, to ensure that it includes Indigenous perspectives and traditional knowledge, not only in what we think of as market structures for financing. So it's, I think, a very hopeful time. It's a very important time for environmental justice to take a really special place for biodiversity across international law, not only in the CBD context, but well beyond it. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you. Please, Antoine.
Thank you, Georgina. I just wanted to mention that at the Commission, environmental justice has had an increased focus since the past few years. And one thing we've realized is that environmental justice means different thing to different people, and across North America, across the world, there's different definitions of environmental justice. And when we think about biodiversity conservation, I think one of the things that we've mentioned is safeguarding nature for future generations. I just want to plug a little our grant program here. Our EJ for Climate, Environmental Justice for Climate grant program is open until the 14th of November, I believe. In the past, we've provided about $6 million to fund 42 projects across North America, and we're looking for proposals for community-led education programs to increase environmental justice and climate adaptation knowledge. So cec.org if you want to look up more information on our environmental justice grant program.
I have one more point as well to add for the environmental justice and biodiversity conservation connection, is that for a lot of years in the United States as well, conservation was always framed as something for the elites to go out to do at national parks, go to Montana and Yellowstone and spend over $2,000 to do that. So something that our legislators thought, why am I participating in this if it's only for the elite? But we're recently seeing that conservation is not just for a few, it's for all of us. And we need conservation to move into the next generation. We're looking now in urban biodiversity, where these cities are really, a lot of them are rich sites of natural areas. Like we have New York City in the harbor, or we have Denver that's right up against the mountains. These are places that were chosen historically because of their unique geographic area, and they do have different types of ecosystems there as well. Unfortunately, a lot of our urban biodiversity has been lost, and this is where we don't have our communities there who are able to experience nature. So this extinction of experience that these communities face leads them to not experience nature more. And for our legislators, it's really important now for them to understand that they have a role in conservation too, and ensuring that their communities that may have historically now been excluded from conservation have an active voice in it and get to experience those benefits of nature in their own backyards, not just for those who go on vacation to our national parks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Justin. I'm seeing the time go super fast, and this is incredible. Maybe in this inclusive perspective, who do you think is missing on that table so that we can move forward? Who did we kind of we're lacking here, Basil?
And following up on the footstep of my predecessor, I think we gotta think harder on how do we engage people that are newcomers to the country that lives in the city and don't have that natural connection. We're going to see increased immigration and migration across the world in the years to come. And it's going to be incumbent on us to create the links to nature for those people.
Thank you, Basil. Please.
I think to that point, something that we're working on that we're really excited about that we think could really help with that kind of thing is Indigenous protected and conserved areas. So recently we purchased a piece of land that has a lot of natural grasslands and some a little bit of wetland and some woodland space on it as well. And we're developing that into a space where people can come and walk through that and see what the like indigenous prairie land would be like in that area, the indigenous wetlands, and you know, we put signage throughout, and we're developing ways that we can do programs where we can do plant walks, nature walks. We do bee monitoring there. We have a variety of different monitoring programs that we can run through these sites, and these are places that can also be a tourist destination for Canada, new Canadians, or for people that grew up in a city and have never been out into the land, seen that kind of natural environment. So it's a really good opportunity for education, and as well, it also creates a space where Indigenous peoples know that they have a safe and protected space to harvest their plant medicines and to protect and to practice their like traditional ceremonies on the land. So things like that are things that Indigenous communities in Canada are starting to do to work towards bridging a lot of those gaps.
I would mention also maybe small landowners, stewards of the lands are people that have such unique perspective and can conserve the land that they live on for many future generations. So whether it's cattle producers or farmers or ejidatarios, people from ejidos in Mexico, hearing their perspective is very important because we need to work with a lot of different people to conserve biomes across the world, across North America in our case of the Commission, nationally as well. So involving all these different peoples is very important, and when they come, they always offer such unique perspective that resonate. So,
thank you, Antoine, and certainly, the CEC has that unique value. We're able to put people together so they have this safe space to interact. And at the CEC, we're working on environmental justice. We're strengthening our efforts to engage with our Indigenous communities to make sure that we meaningfully engage youth, and certainly, you know, we're also trying to engage with the private sector. I think that's also someone that should be on the table also discussing these topics. Mindful of the time, we're going to open it for questions. Raise your hand. I'll just pass the mic. Also, you know, for our panelists, if you want to ask questions to the other panelists, just please feel free. So I'm just going to start kind of walking around the room.
Hi. I think it's working. Okay. Hi, I am Mariana, working at the Women of the Métis Nation, and I could answer your question. 2 women. 2 women and how many men? So I think part of the inclusivity is bringing more women to the table. And I would like to know, actually, is you who have I mean, if you are considering how many women are participating from, as you pointed out, from the beginning of the definition of the plans and initiatives, and actually what's going on when you don't see women, if you actually take an action, because in many times women are taking care of kids and food and cooking dinner, and men are in the meeting making decisions that would actually take impact on women. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I can speak for Squamish. Our women are the most powerful beings because we have quite a few Squamish women that are natural herbal. They're natural plant women. They'll go out on the land and they'll harvest our natural plants and prepare them for medicines, whether it be salves or whether it be grinding the leaves into teas. They'll be able to go out and they'll harvest those traditional plants. And we have quite a few, probably about 8 to 10 women, and they bring their children, their daughters, and they bring their granddaughters. So that's the intergenerational life skills. So that's all I could say. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And, and as I'm sure you're familiar working with La Femme Chief, Métis communities historically and currently have largely been matriarchal communities as well, and family lines are largely matriarchal. And when you look at current Métis leadership as well, there's a lot of very strong, powerful women that are leading the charge within these spaces. And just recently within Alberta, over the past couple of years, we've gone through the journey of really actionizing our self-governance and our self-determination. We went through the process of creating our own constitution and had our first election under our own constitution to create our own self-governance. And our council of elected officials is over 60% women and over 30% youth. And so I find that, obviously there's huge gaps that still need to be filled, but Indigenous people, I find often do good with that inclusivity in that regard. And especially within the Métis communities that I have experience with, there's a lot of very strong, powerful women, and we would not be where we are today without them.
Mariana, no tengo una muy buena respuesta.
I don't have a wonderful answer for your question, but I believe that particularly when it comes to Latin America and the Latin American context, particularly Mexico, I'd say this is 1,000 times more complicated to talk about women's inclusions and participation of women. But I have to say that this is something that is changing slightly and we're moving forward. I'll refer to a few projects that I lead. We are currently working on this priority to achieve the integration of women in these projects. Most of our projects have women as the decision makers. These are no longer meetings led by men, but also we allow women, we have these meetings with women who are presidents of councils. We even have a female president, our first female president ever in our country. So this is to say that we are moving forward, although slowly, we are definitely moving forward. And I think everyone here today, the members of these panels, are truly committed to achieve women's equality and participation, particularly when referring to Indigenous women. We think that these are the women that look after not only our communities, but take charge in a lot of the initiatives that we have. Women are part of the labor. They are also nurses, teachers. They are the core of our projects. So unfortunately, my answer doesn't, it's not the perfect answer, but I have to say that it's a work in progress. Thank you.
From the public?
Mine's more of a comment than anything, but I'm just picking up on the buffalo hunt. At one time in North America, there were over 40 million head of buffalo going from Alaska all the way down into New Mexico. Those were almost decimated to the point where we had a herd of 120 left. Parks Canada was very instrumental in building the herd that is now being spread out back into the United States, into Siberia, and into our grasslands. Our grasslands have been decimated by agriculture. The buffalo were the stewards of the land. So about 10 years ago, the First Nations that live in that BC area worked with the government to get the buffalo back into the mountain areas. And they're thriving there. And they're returning, the grasslands are returning to the traditional natural way they were. And now the bonus is, because buffalo was everything to us. It was our clothes. It was our food. It was our materials that we made tools with. It was everything. Now our governments are based on the laws of the buffalo hunt that Métis people had. That's how important that hunt was to us. And now it's exciting that we can go in traditionally and take our youth and show them how we harvested that animal, how we used every part from the nose to the tail. The tail was a fly swatter. The hooves were used to boil down, to make glue, to seal the canoes. Like everything was used. And now we get to go do that again. And that's been a partnership of many people and many organizations and many nations been involved in that. So that's what I wanted to say.
Or I'm not sure if anyone wants to respond to that or say anything. Yeah, my question was, so in the beginning, people talked about, not just consulting Indigenous communities after the fact, but also kind of working with them at the beginning. My question is, how much capacity is there for a lot of co-creation, which in some cases requires not only traditional knowledge, but also, the kind of traditional, current scientific systems we have in place. So I'm curious to know how much capacity there is for that, and just how much Indigenous communities, which I know are very diverse, want to be included from the beginning, and in what shape that kind of takes. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. As someone who is a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, I can speak for Squamish. Squamish right now, we have 1,081 people over the age of 55. We have 2 of our elders are 99 and 98. And the biggest challenge for us is with the introduction to residential schools, Indian Day School, 60 Scoop, the Christianity has really impacted how we continue to carry our traditional laws and traditional teachings. We still have a great number of our elders who are devout Catholics, and I respect my elders. My dad, my parents were devout Catholics. The challenge is some of our elders are hesitant to engage in traditional practices because of their belief system in Catholicism. So there is a disconnect. So how can we include everyone? The greatest thing that I can say within Squamish, and I see it within the Assembly First Nations, is that we're engaging our youth. We do have a youth on the National Assembly First Nations. We do have a youth council. We have a Knowledge Keepers Council, which is a council I sit on, as well as our elected chiefs and leaders throughout the country. So, I don't even know if I'm answering your question. Not even close. I'm hearing impaired, so you do need to shout. I just want to thank you for your question. I'm brain dead now. Thank you.
I'd like to speak a bit towards your question too, and I think it's important to not conflate capacity with capability. And I would say, I think it's fairly safe to say that all across the board, all across North America, Indigenous peoples have the capability to participate in good-hearted consultation in that aspect. Now, across all Indigenous nations across North America, there is going to be different capacities in terms of like the infrastructure that they have set up, or the organizations or the staffing that they have. And I think that's largely due, or almost entirely due, to the effects of colonization. So that's where there becomes a responsibility within the colonial governments and the very large corporations to help supply some of that capacity to Indigenous people to participate in that consultation.
Antoine, please.
I think one important thing to realize is I work with 3 federal governments, and the timelines that we set in projects are not the same timelines that that we will be using in engaging indigenous communities. So we cannot say, oh, we're going to have a 2-year project and it doesn't work like that. It's about relationship building. It has to come from a good place. It has to be done in good faith. We have a new Indigenous Affairs and Traditional Ecological Knowledge Officer that this is something that he's been working on, engaging different communities on different topics. And on the other side of your question about the willingness to engage, we did work, as I mentioned earlier, in Northern Chihuahua and Jajamuy communities in Mexico. And we were very careful about how we set up our work. It was an indigenous person from the United States of Mexican descent that went there to visit those communities. And we were very mindful of what they share with us is their own knowledge. It is their own, not product, I don't want to say product, but it is their own work. And if they want to keep it that way, of course, we'll keep it that way. But we overwhelmingly heard that they shared this information with us because they want to share it with the world. So they share many different things with us that they want us to disseminate, to diffuse. So this is something that we very welcomed, and we'll be publishing about indigenous perspectives from these communities and grasslands conservation, but also what's really important to them in their communities and the challenges that they face and the support that they need. So,
thank you.
Yeah, I want to highlight something that you mentioned at the beginning there that I think is a very important aspect when it comes to consultation and engagement, and it's about relationship building. It's not a quick process, and it's never going to be a quick process, unfortunately. And if you really want meaningful consultation that's going to end to a result that's amicable for all parties, then step one is going out in community. Just spend time with these people, get to know them, get to learn them, share a meal with them, and figure out who they are. And, through that, you build that trust. For Indigenous peoples, we define ourselves through our kinship ties a lot of the times. And so these relationships and that fundamental foundation of trust, it needs to be at the basis of all things. Again, unfortunately, due to colonization, there is an inherent distrust towards colonial structures from Indigenous peoples. And, if that distrust still exists, there's oftentimes it's going to be hard to have meaningful engagement. So building that trust and building those relationships needs to be step one.
Thank you, Secretary Jason. And I think it's about trust. It's about communication. It's about the meaningful engagement. And kind of, as you said, to be genuine about when we want to include everyone. And I think those are values that everyone at the CEC takes at heart. And this panel just wanted to do that. Hopefully today you're making new connections. Hopefully today this is the beginning of a new relationship with someone that you met in this panel. The CEC is there to help you in making those connections in North America, in our 3 countries, Canada, Mexico, and the US. But certainly we have here some voices kind of from outside of North America because we're still learning. The CEC has been there for 30 years. We have a lot more to learn from all the different generations, from all the different perspectives. We will close this panel or this dialogue. There's going to be kind of some refreshment if you want to stay to make connections, to network a little bit. But before we leave, I just want our panelists, in one word, just one word. What are you taking home today? What emotion, what thought, what is in your mind right now? What has this panel inspired you?
Hope.
Gratitude.
Trust.
Effort.
Thankfulness.
Enthusiasm.
Also trust.
Alexandra?
I think also someone said this already, but hope. I mean, really, and especially in the middle of negotiations, hope is so critical. So thank you all. But hope is really something that I think
Can you
everyone
repeat your word?
reason to have.
We'll make sure to capture that on our notes. On behalf of the CEC, the CEC delegation, the small delegation of the CEC that's here, and all our colleagues that are back in Montreal, where the Secretary is, We truly want to thank you, all of you, everyone that's listening online. And really, we hope that you leave this event thinking about the CC, thinking how the CC can be helpful for you. We have a booth, number 14, if you want to come and talk to us. And please just stay and just chat with us and make those important connections for your life. Thank you very much.